Hi guys, and welcome to lesson 3 of the drum synthesis module. We're going to be doing hats and percussion this time. I've gone to the trouble of making a little project, a little loop including our existing kick and snare, and then I've gone and made some hats. So again, no samples, at least at this stage, all just using Serum and the kind of noise generators and processing. We may do some additions at the end with some real sounds, as I'd imagine you probably want to in the reality of making tunes, but again I want to be able to create everything with content that everyone has. So hats sound a little bit like this. Made some tambourines and some kind of splashy cymbal stuff. Cool. So I've obviously used the kick and snare there, or there's some snare ghosts here as well. So I'll just play the loop through. Sweet. So let's kind of break these bits down. So let's start with the hats then. So let's just loop this thing. So I tend to have my hat loops kind of already sidechained, if that makes any sense. You don't really want to have the Hat Transient sitting on top of your drums ever, your kick and snare. So a very common loop to have is this. Which fills out every 8th note that isn't a kick or snare. So you've got boom, hat there, no hat, 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 no hat, hat, if that makes sense. So I'll just quickly bounce out what that looks like so it's more obvious, because that was just an awful explanation. So let's go for grab these and this guy. Cool. So we've got a main hat on the first offbeat of the quarter, and then we've got another smaller one before another main hit in the middle, and then one at the end. So you just get used to this kind of. That's if you're working with this classic kick snare pattern, and obviously you'd move them around. If this kick was there, you'd probably have something like that going on. Or indeed, if that was there, you would probably move him over. Let's just undo that a little bit. You tend to want to never put the same sample next to itself because it sounds a bit robotic, so you probably go. Anyway. That's just describing the rhythm that we're going for there. So I set this this loop up, but let's just kind of focus in on one thing at a time here. So let's scroll over to the left and ignore all that noise, and maybe put some space in here. Just to, I don't know if this actually helps anyone else, but for me, it's nice to just be able to focus in on, just look at what I need to be looking at. Cool. So then, I break down the hat into its various components. In this case, I kind of just think of them as two different parts. So you have the decay, and I've actually got a more complex one here. We'll go through that in a minute. So that's the kind of the longer lasting part of the sound, and then you've got the transient, which is the kind of the smack. Obviously, hats and percussion are going to be a lot lighter than your kick and snare, but they still want to have some sort of snap to them. And I find it easier to separate those out. So I start with the transient, which it's easy to presume that hats and stuff are going to have pretty much only top end, treble. But that's not actually the case. Let's make this a little bit smaller. I think it's really important for your transient and your percussions to have quite a lot of this upper mid-range stuff. bit chunkier than just straight up, just top end, because no real sound just has top end only. Everything, you know, any real percussive sound, if you look at a hi-hat if you record one, you'll see that it's actually almost a flat response. Yeah, with some top end, definitely some spikes up there, but you get a lot of mid-range in the transients and stuff, and I like retaining that a little bit. It also helps stuff poke through the mix. So I've set up a little serum loop, some MIDI there. There's nothing going on other than it's this noise generator it was on. I was initially using the LFOs to create some transients and stuff, but I found, and I tend to find, that just drawing it in myself in automation is going to be easier. So yeah, we've got serum, some EQ, which I'll go through in a minute. Let's turn that off. So what I start with is just a sound and an envelope. So instead of drawing in a completely infinite, you know, silent to loud part, I have this little scoop, which I think is quite important. I think real hats and realistic sounds have this kind of scoop up to full volume rather than this nothing to everything nature, like those synth snares do. It sounds a little more pleasing to the ear with high end to have it kind of like quickly scoop up. So let's exaggerate that and we'll see what I'm talking about. So we've got like a ramp up to a loud part and then it coming back down. Obviously that's a little too scoopy. So let's move that in. Cool, so that is a little bit low maybe. Just the setting I've got then, so it's you'll have this project obviously, but I've got AC home, which is just the default sound that you have coming out of the noise generator, and I've pitched it down a little bit. And let's just play about with that. That's a little too top endy for me. It's got a little bit of thwack there, and I quite like that. So from there, it's just a little bit of EQ. You don't want too much. Sometimes I will leave that much mid-range in, but for this one it sounded a little bit cleaner to have it more like this. So it's important to note that that's all that leaving that mid-range is applicable to the transient, but I would not leave that much in the decay. So let's move on to that part then. So I've got a new serum patch. Let's turn off the EQ again. So again, I start with the sound and just the envelope. So this, as you can see, is lasting a lot longer. This has got quite a tight decay with this curve going backwards. This one's got the opposite kind of curve. It's lasting a little bit longer. So I've got for this one, it's actually the same sound again. This is the first one. I've EQ'd it a fair bit though, so I've got it to, oops, how can you undo that? Unlucky. Let's move that back up. So I've got these notches just taking out these nasty frequencies, which I'm not going to move because I pitched it wrong. So that's without them, and that's with them removed. They're just a little too much, but yeah, I've just boosted the signal in the top end there and taken out some lows. Pretty standard really. So to play this together, that's already sounding pretty good. I like the chunk of the transient on like the slightly lower sounding noise. It's pretty good for me. This next bit, I like a little bit of kind of dirt or grit to my percussion if I can. So I like adding these kind of sounds. So this is a little chain I've made where I've got some just straight up noise. So that AC hum again, just the first one. So it was actually just a copy of this patch. Same decay, I believe, which was actually applied to the group. So I've got two sounds. I've got a low end sine wave. Let's just take these out of the of their current processing and listen to them. So we've got a sine wave down here, which obviously we're not hearing in the end result, and then we've got that same hat. Without the processing or automation, it's just a straight. Let's put them back both back to the group then. So this one wants to go to crush, and this one wants to go to crush as well. So what's happened there is that we've taken this signal with some top end and this really loud low end sine wave, and I've put it into trash 2, which is our distortion. I've gone on to fuzz and then acid, and I've just pushed the pre up really far. There's no specific rule to this section, so if I take off this setting and we put in another trash 2, and we'll just build it from scratch, it's all just kind of to taste. So I put the limiter on so it's not going to go crazy in volume. An important thing to do is to be low cutting after this. We don't want any of that sine wave or any low end information. We're trying to just get a kind of dense, crunchy style top end. So as soon as we start putting on some distortion, we're going to start hearing that the oscillation of the sine wave, the kind of speed of it, pushed through to the top end, and you get this kind of really quick tremolo effect, which gives you this quite aggressive feel. So let's just try. An obvious one will be like one of these two. And to really exaggerate what I'm talking about here, if I just take down the pitch of the sine wave so you can really hear its oscillations, you'll understand what I'm talking about. So that's like an LFO doing like a volume up and down, isn't it? If we turn that up, and again, and again, you start to get to this really kind of nasty, gritty top end feel. And then from there, it's just deciding on which of the millions of distortion types to use. And I just play about pretty much with these two parameters. Acid sounds pretty nice and crunchy for me. We could spend longer finding a different one, but that's working just fine. And then it's just about applying that envelope once more. We have ourselves a nice tasty hat. Once I'd done that, to get this full loop that we had up here, I think it's important to have like a secondary hat. If you have too many of the same exact sounds next to each other, they get really robotic. And in the real world, that never happens, where all the harmonics are the exact same every time. So your ear picks up on that really quickly and decides that it's like not real. So when having the moment in the middle of the bar where you've got these two hats next to each other, it's important to have like an ulterior version. And how I achieved that was to just bounce out the this hat that we'd made here. Let's just change that beat back to the original one. And if I scroll, get rid of this guy, you'll see this bounced out version. So those are the kind of the offbeat hats, and then you've got this little smaller version, which I tend to have a quicker decay, so I'm just going to delete this channel and recreate. So let's bring him in, put him in the same color as the hats, and hopefully it's in the hat group still. Cool. So let's bounce this then, our current hat. Okay, so it's going to be this one here then. I'm definitely going to make the decay a little bit shorter. As you can hear, it just sounds a bit robotic having it straight next to itself. This kind of da-da, da-da sounds just kind of really unnatural. So ways around that are to change the pitch of it. That already sounds pretty good. Sometimes you can tell that it's just the same sample pitched up though. So to kind of counteract that, I've pitched it up by 3 semitones, and I'm going to pitch it down with a frequency shifter, which is a different type of pitch shift. So we get something kind of similar in pitch, but is different. And also naturally speeding it up will shorten the decay. So there we go, that's how I did the hats. So let's have a look at these kind of wash layers. This was a super easy one to do. So let's get rid of all the stuff we didn't end up using. So let's just concentrate on one of them. I'll make a copy of it so we don't mess up the original. I'll just call this Splash C. So without these, it just sounds a little bit dry. There will be, you know, parts of your tunes that you want to have that, but it's nice to have these layers as an option. So let's get Splash Center then. So let's just loop this guy. So I've gone onto Serum again. I've got the I've chosen Aircan 5. So this is Organics Aircan 5, and I've pretty much left it at that. You've got these kind of really whistly frequencies that sound kind of real. So that's pretty much what I did for that one. Put the utility on and just decided on a new envelope. So it kind of lasts for the majority of the quarter bar and dips toward the end. I've got a slight scoop just to make it quite a smooth sound. So it kind of feels like it runs into itself. To exaggerate that, you kind of do this thing. That can work quite nice as well, but for this one, I want it to be more of a straight decay. So yeah, that was as simple as I went on that one. For the kind of the width, I created a duplicate of this initial version. Simply pitched it down and put them kind of slightly to the left and right. So 24 left, 24 right. There you go. Cool, so let's move into the kind of more, well, the tambourine area. Things pick up a little bit here. I quite often hear in tunes, and I do this myself, where as the tune progresses, you kind of start to add more layers and it gets a little bit techier. It's quite common to add a 16th note tambourine, 16 bars or 32 bars in, and that would sound a little bit like this. Obviously, there are a million real tambourine samples out there, so feel free to use those, but it's nice to be able to kind of synthesize something along the lines of that. Also, I've added in these snare ghosts, which is just versions of the original. I use that same trick with the hat where I pitch him up and then back down with a frequency shifter to create some sort of difference in the sound to remove the robotic nature of them. The tambourines then, let's quickly go through them. I'm going to just, again, create some space so we can kind of zoom in on just this and ignore everything else. So let's grab a whole bar then and zoom in. Sweet. So this chain's a little bit more complex, but I think we'll be just fine. So I created some width by creating two versions of it. Let's create a new one, and then maybe let's put the original back in where it was. Cool. Again, any messing around with this one that I do won't affect the next. So I'll create. I'll just get rid of the width layer, and we can just talk about one thing at a time. So let's take off everything and piece it back together as we work on. Always forget the shortcut for the scrolling on this one. There you go. Cool. So the initial and most important thing is choosing the source sound and then the envelope. So in this case, I wanted something really peaky. So Aircan 4 has provided that pretty well. If we look on span here, there's loads of these kind of really resonant spikes, which if you look at a tambourine, that's what it's about. Okay, so I've got utility up then. Let's have a look at the envelope. So it's creating this 16th note rhythm. I've got each quarter note louder than the rest, and I've actually made sure that there's quite a lot of variation in like the lengths and kind of transient hits of each one. So this one's got a scoop, this one's got a slightly longer scoop, this one's got just a tick, you know, where it goes from 0 straight to full volume, just to make sure that it's sounding kind of natural. This one's been lifted a little bit, so I'm just doing it by ear, you know, just kind of looping around this section. Just creating some differences to make sure it's less robotic. I've also done some pitch shifting with a frequency shifter after this to again create some more movement in the sound, so it doesn't sound like a completely synthesized tambourine. So it's going from 0 Hz down to 182 and back up, just using the fine tool on the frequency shifter there. I've also actually shifted it up by 544 Hz. Which I think I end up undoing later on, but let's keep that in there for now. So that's actually not far off what I want it to be. I wanted some more I wanted to fill out some more frequencies, so I had the original version of the chain. Again, to create these groups, you're just gonna click on any plugin and Control G, and then you get the kind of chain button here, and you can start Control D and duplicating those. Let's get rid of all that madness, ungroup. So I've got the orig and then the this kind of lower version. So I've just got some more spikes there basically to work with. Then I wanted this kind of reverby thing to happen. They sound a little bit dry, which can be good, and I bounced out 2 versions, one of which with, one of which without, of course. It's just a super close reverb, so I like to just duplicate the chain, add in a reverb with a really small size. Just because I think tambourines sound a little bit too synthetic with that. It sounds a little bit closer to what I was going for. Some slight EQ boost just on the tops. I ended up shifting them back down altogether by 6 to 8, and putting some limiting on because those spikes are a bit harsh. So let's see what they sound like in the mix. On the whole group here, I've just got some automations going on. In the same way that I didn't want Hat Transients sitting on top of my kick and snare, I also don't ever want tambourine or any other layers interrupting those synth transients. So I've just done some little dips in automation in volume for each kick and snare on the whole bus. We'll go through more of that in the kind of mixing and sidechaining the whole tune section, but I find that I struggle to listen to loops nowadays without fixing that kind of error. Let's quickly go through how I did the snare ghosts then. So I've just imported in the BG snare into this sampler. Snare ghost notes want to be a little bit shorter in Decay, so again I'm just drawing in my own envelope with utility. I've added a little bit of a spike at the front, just to give it a little more snap. It wants to be a shorter and snappier version of the original snare. So I've actually pitched it up. So instead of, I put it in at C3 and then told it the sample, the root was actually E2. So it reckons the snare is actually, its normal note is somewhere down here. And then when you play it up there, obviously it pitches it up. So I use this as like a reverse pitch up or down tool So if I drag down, it's going to go up in pitch. If I drag up, it's going to go down in pitch. So I've made it a slightly higher pitch than the original snare, and then frequency shifted it down to a point where they kind of sound like they're a similar drum. They're close enough. I mean, they were the originally the same sample, so you've got a bit of leeway there. And then I just created another ghost. As you can hear, it kind of goes ditto, like it's the first one's higher than the second one's lower. I've just actually taken the frequency shifting basically off the second one. There's something about having that really robotic two ghost note the same thing. Which I'm just not quite a fan of, so I've done that. But, you know, that's all to taste, really. That about concludes it then, I think. We've gone through how to make a hat, how to make like a splashy back layer, and how to make some tambourines and some ghosts. That's the majority of what I put in tunes in terms of percussion. I mean, that's as far as I would go with the synthetic part of it, certainly. We could add some real layers, but I'm going to leave that for the music writing stage, because it's hard to know what we want to include until we know what other parts and musical elements are going to come in. Wicked. All right, guys, I will see you in the next module. Cheers.